Hello everyone, thank you for joining. Um, Before starting, I want to ask you one question. What is a website? I want you to imagine a website is like your front door. A website is a company's image to the world. It's more than that. It's the first impression, and you want your first impression to be good. So you want your website to look good. Today we're going to see how easy that is. My name is Vicencio. I'm a front-end developer and team lead at Cognizant Softvision. I specialize in JavaScript and currently I'm focusing on Angular. So what is intrinsic? Before I try to answer that, I like to go through a short history of web design trends. In 1995, we had pure HTML, no CSS. We had tables. It was all about the content, no styling. But 1 year later, Flash came in with animations, fonts, shapes. It was the dream of designers, but it also had some drawbacks. You would need to had Flash installed. You need to keep it up to date for security issues, and well, it would take forever to load the website if they had a lot of content. And I don't even want to think about search engine optimization because that was a nightmare. And now it's dead, thank God. We have CSS. 1998 brought us CSS, which separated content from presentation. You can have your content in HTML and your styling in a separate file where everything is easier to understand. And in 2010, we have responsive web design. So you all know responsive web design. It's not dead yet. It's already it's used today. Responsive web design brought us a couple of things like fluid grids, flexible images, media queries. We all know about media queries. And today I want to introduce you to Intrinsic Web Design, which is basically a couple of new new features that are natively available in the browser. So we're talking about fluid columns and rows, flexible and fixed images, and the media queries become optional. So I want to take a deep dive into intrinsic web design. Let's take it for a spin. I will open some examples, 8 to be exact, and I want you to ask any questions that are related to the examples after each example so I can answer them to the point, and I will leave other questions at the end. Okay, so if we're all good with that, I'm going to open the first example. I'm assuming you will see this. Okay, so what do we have here? The good old Bootstrap, a responsive 4-column layout. We all know Bootstrap. You can resize your window, and no matter what device you have, you will still see a good looking layout. So this is nothing new. This is the good old Bootstrap. Calls and container and row. I used Bootstrap 3 for nostalgia. Okay, but the more interesting example is the next one. This is an example that is going to use Flex. Okay, so I have these so-called columns that are not columns right now. I'm going to make them into columns. So what we see as markup, we have a container, we have a couple of rectangles, which will serve as our columns, and some basic styling. I'm going to add display flex, and we're seeing some change, but we need to add flex 1 to the columns to specify that each column will take the same amount of space. So in this case, the container will span for the whole available space in the window, in the parent, and the rectangles that will become columns will be equally divided in the parent. So the difference to Bootstrap is that I can resize it and it will always stay in 4 columns. I may not want that for my mobile device. So let's see what the next example will show us. So in the next example, it's kind of the same. We have the same layout, and I'm going to add, instead of flex 1, which I did earlier to occupy the entire available space, I'm going to display flex, and I'm going to center them. Okay, so this way we have 4 columns, but they do not take the whole available space. And when we go to a smaller device, we still have the same problem. So how do we fix this? We can add wrap. Adding wrap fixes this issue. So now I'm going to have a similar behavior to Bootstrap, because if a column is too small to fit on the row, it will wrap to the next row. So on the mobile, I have something similar with Bootstrap. With some tweaking, you can adjust this as you want, depending on how much, depending on what you need. Okay, I'm going to check for questions here. Okay, none until now. So let's go to the next one. Okay. I'm only showcasing Flex right now on the first examples, but I want to go to its limits. So Flex has its limits. And you can see where Flex doesn't shine is when you want something more like a grid, when you want more than one row for a column and the other columns to fall in line. So in this example, I would love to have the first column fill up this space as well, and these stay as a grid, as a nice grid. So it's not whole. I cannot fix this with Flex, at least I don't know how. So it might be with hacks and everything, but why use hacks when you can use the native grid that is available in CSS? I'm gonna go on to this example. So this is a grid example. Right now it's nothing because it's just a container. And what are we going to do is to add the grid layout. I'm going to add display grid. Okay, I'm already seeing some action. It's like a mobile layout, but this is because it doesn't know how to lay out the grid. So I'm going to need to specify how the grid should look. So grid template columns. This enables me to specify a template. So for instance, if I want 4 columns that are I don't know, 100 pixels or 200 pixels, I'm just going to type here this 4 times. Okay, this is just an example, but it's obviously not what I want. I want the grid to fill up the whole screen. So maybe instead of using a fixed pixels, fixed number, I'm going to use something that is more flexible. There is this auto property. So now I'm going to split the grid into 4 columns. Let's see how this works. Okay, this works pretty well. But if you want 10 columns, you might not want to write 10 times the same thing. So you can use repeat. I think it's this way. It's the same as before. So repeat, this is what it does, number of times and what to repeat. I can still use 200 pixels here or anything else. If I want 10, it will look like this. Not cool. Okay. But this property, this CSS rule grid template columns can do a lot more than this. If you want to look it up, it's really powerful. What we try to fix here is that on a mobile device, you still see the grid like this, and it's not going to fit. Imagine having here a table or I don't know, 4 images on a row. It's not going to fit. It's not going to look good. So what we want is some behavior similar to Bootstrap that will push the columns onto the next row when they don't fit. So I'm going to have to decide when they don't fit. We're going to lose what we learned earlier. Repeat. Okay. There's this really nice property or property value, autofill. What autofill does is it doesn't restrict me to a fixed number of columns. Okay, so I don't have to say 4. I can use autofill. So we're not always limited to 4 columns. And then we're going to say what dimension the columns should have. Again, instead of using a fixed number over auto, we're going to use something more interesting called min-max. So I'm just going to open MDN here. I know how to use it, but I want to explain it to you. Min-max is a function that enables a box, something, to have a minimum and a maximum. It takes two values, okay? It's a size range, basically. It's greater than or equal to min and less than or equal to max. So basically, I'm going to say I want each box to have minimum 350 pixels. I'm going to use something fixed for this example. And max, for max, I'm going to use a cool unit called fraction. And to make them equal, I'm going to set them to one fraction each. Okay, so the magic is ready. I'm going to read this again. We have repeat, okay, autofill, and min-max 350 pixels and one fraction. That means that if a box comes under 350 pixels, it will be pushed, so it becomes bigger. You see how that automatically shifted 6th and 7th columns to the 3rd row. And I can do this. And for the mobile device, you'll see something like this. They're all stacked one under the other. So you can see that our problem here that we had with flex is also fixed. The first column takes 2 rows. It looks nice. If I had, I don't know, more boxes, it will look even nicer. So I think this is a really cool feature, and you can explore what grid template columns does. It's really, really powerful. It has a lot of options for a lot of situations because we need different things. Okay, so this is not needed anymore. With just two properties, two CSS rules, you can create something like this, which is amazing. You don't have to worry about how many columns, how many rows this is going to take for a mobile, for a tablet, for a small tablet, for a big tablet, for a big PC, and all that. It's really everything flows naturally. Okay, let's see the next example, if you don't have any questions on this one. The next example, I'm going to show you something with grid. Okay, let me close this one. So grid is really powerful, I was saying. Right here we have 14 boxes. Yeah, that's right. And I don't know if you remember, there was a CSS library called Masonry, which created something of a masonry grid. I'm going to look it up, masonry grid. It basically looks something like this. You have different height boxes and equal columns. So this is kind of like Pinterest. So I want to showcase how you can create a grid like this just using CSS Grid. It's not that advanced, but with some tweaking, you can get to that result you will get with the library. And this only, of course, with a few native CSS rules. So we're going to start off from the same example that we had before. we have the HTML here, and we have the CSS here that we used before. We can see that the grid is equal, uh, but um, it doesn't take into consideration these things that so for first box I want to take 3 rows, and these ones I want to take 2 rows. How are we going to do that? In here I'm going to add 2 classes just to give an example. Call 3x and call 2x. These are going to specify the row span that this box should take. So this box should have a 3 row span, and this box should span for 2 rows. How to do that? Well, there is another property in grid, because I'm going to uncomment this, and it will magically happen. Okay, it looks a lot like the masonry grid now. I'm going to open MDN again. Basically, what grid row does is to specify. You can specify a span here, but it also has other values with row. Okay. These guys explain it better than me. So you basically say the item's size and location within the grid. So for instance, this one means that you will have size 1, and it will span for 2 rows. You can also set more values with grid row and grid row start. It's really complex, but you can do really simple stuff with just this. So instead of 1, I used auto, but I used span 2 to span this box to 2 rows, and span 3 to span this box to 3 rows. You might also notice this gap. This is the grid gap that I set here. It's another property. And now if we play around with this a little bit, you'll see that it flows nicely into other screen sizes as well. So mobile will just stack it one on top of the other, as you should, and it looks good no matter what. This is the idea. So I didn't write 10 media queries for each screen size. I just wrote a simple 2-liner for the grid. You see how simple and easy it looks. Okay, so this is what grid can do. Of course, there's more you can do with grid, but you should find that on your own. I'm going to show you how you can use flex and grid together, because it's not one or the other. You can also use them together on the same page. And starting from the same example, we have this example that we just built earlier. But let's say I want to add a menu on the left, like a sidebar here. You might have seen those blogs, or basically many sites today do this. So I'm going to uncomment my menu here. Okay, so this is the sidebar menu. It's already styled nicely, but it's in the wrong position. I want to have it on the left, and the grid should be on the right. And to do that, I'm going to use flex. I have the wrapper element, and I want to flex those two. So I'm going to use display flex. I'm going to use flex 1 for the menu and flex for the grid. That means out of the five parts of the page, you split the page in 5, and the grid should take 4 parts and the menu should take 1 part. The grid stays the same as before. It resizes automatically, as well as keeping the proportions of the menu with flex. So this takes 1 part, this takes 4 parts. You can adjust the proportions easily. This can take 3 parts. And now we have the page split in 4. So you're not limited to the classical 12 columns. You can add 100, you can add 4, 3, 5. So it's really nice. Okay. The last example is an interesting one. I'm going to use finally, I'm going to use something different than Flex and Grid. We have the same sidebar menu that we saw earlier. And on the right, we have something that resembles a blog post with an image, a headline, and some text. What happens is that the image is stretched. You can see that, and it doesn't look very good on a screen this size. What we can do is resize it, and you can see the image becomes to adjust, but it's still stretched, so it won't keep its proportions, and we might not want that for our images. In order to fix that, you can use object fit for the image, which has a few values. Cover, for instance, is my favorite. So cover is basically going to keep the aspect ratio of the image, and it's going to adjust it. So in this case, if I'm going to resize the window, more of the image comes into the frame. Okay, this one. Yeah, so now I can see the full image, but if I resize, the image is not stretched and it still looks good. You can also use contain, which will basically fit the image in the space, and it will take the width or the height, whichever works better. And you can adjust, for instance, for cover, you can also adjust object position. So let's say I want to see X centered and Y will be top. So I want to see the sky, or maybe just the bottom part of the image, or I don't know, 60%. You can use whatever you want here. So now the image is resized and adjusted, but it keeps its aspect ratio. Okay, so this is the last example with the image. Now, if you have any questions on the examples, if not, we're going to go to the next section. Okay, so now I can answer what is intrinsic. It's basically a set of guidelines where you can use out-of-the-box features. It contains rows and columns. You have the new units. you have a fraction, min max, min content, which you can mix with old units like okay, sorry for that. And you can mix them with the old units like percent and auto. So you basically are doing a mix and match of the all the new units. You can go with grid and flex and have the old flow layout in the same page. And you can go with flexible and fixed images because not all the images need to be flexible. Media queries remain optional. You can basically try not to use them, but if you want to use them, go ahead and use them. The browser support for these features is at around 98% for flex layout, which is a really good browser support. And 94.95% for grid layout. Object fit has 96%. So this is the global usage, including prefixed as of this month. So I don't want to hear any of you that this doesn't work, it's not supported. It has pretty good browser support. So what's next? Well, where is web design going? A new HTML feature is the dialog. You can have some content in here. You can add buttons. And the beauty of it is that you have pure HTML, CSS for styling, and JavaScript for the interaction. So it's basically just the basic features of the browser. No frameworks needed, but yeah, the browser support is not there yet. We only have Chrome and Edge, but I think this will be a nice feature that we'll see next year, maybe. Another interesting feature is CSS scroll snapping. This is kind of a nice one. I'm going to show a nice demo. This is not mine. As you can see from the link here. So I'm going to open this with a mobile emulator so you can see, oh, come on, how it looks. Let's go with this. This is very old. Okay. Like this. So what this does is you can swipe and it will snap to the closest edge. So if I swipe 80%, it will snap to the edge of the section. It's really nice because it doesn't use any complicated JavaScript to compute the closest edge from the screen and all that. It's just CSS. And to see how it's done, basically you have just sections here, and the magic comes from this one. Scroll snap type for the slider, for the parent, is X, which means it's horizontal and mandatory. And for the sections, we need to specify where the snapping should align. Okay, that's it with this example. The support for the CSS scroll snapping is really good. You can try it. And I want to ask you, can computers write code for us? Yes, we have website builders, editors. Remember Dreamweaver, that has been there for a long time. But can computers design creatively? Isn't the creative nature the single best feature of the human being? Um, I would say no, they cannot do that yet, but they can suggest based on what they learn. So this week's artificial design intelligence asks you a few questions about your logo, um, and it takes you through a series of like and dislike questions. And at the end, it will suggest, based on AI, some logos for your new brand. So this is all automatic. Sorry for the designers. Okay. Another example, you can look it up, FireDrop. They use AI to create unique designs automatically. They basically automated the production of ads by scanning the company's image assets and determining the ones that are most likely to have a high click rate. The time has come to learn more. You have a few resources here. Please do take a snapshot of this slide. Um, I recommend all of these links. You may already know about Flexbox Froggy. I'll show it to you in a minute. You have a really good tutorial here on YouTube for Flexbox. As for Grid, I'm recommending this site. I'll show you in a bit, and this YouTube tutorial. So if you're done taking your pictures, I'm going to go to Flexbox Froggy for 1 second. Okay, so it appears I'm at level 2. This is a CSS game where you write CSS on the left and the right is the result. You need to get the frog to the pad by using your flex knowledge. Then you have 24 levels to go through this. This is a YouTube tutorial. You can discover it and learn CSS Grid, which is like a written tutorial kind of type. It explains with images what each property does and examples. It's really, really good. Okay. I'm going to take some questions now. If there are any, please don't hesitate to write them. Okay. If there are no questions, thank you for your time. You can reach me later on these links and have a nice Friday.